This is Karl Liebknecht and Rosa Luxemburg. They've just been arrested and soon they'll be dead, murdered by a right-wing paramilitary group for instigating a communist uprising in Berlin. Karl's body would be beaten and mutilated, and later dumped at a police station, unrecognisable and labelled as an unknown corpse. But Rosa would get the worst of it. Shot in the temple, her body is thrown into the Landwehr Canal, where it won't be found for over a month. But how did it come to this? How did two revolutionaries end up murdered in cold blood with no repercussions? What kind of chaos unfolded to result in their capture? And what could have happened had the uprising succeeded? Hi, welcome to my new channel History Cam, where we will dive into some of history's most interesting events, darkest crimes, and alternate history scenarios. This is a retrospective on the Spartacist Uprising of 1919. It's November 9th. 1918, and Germany is in chaos. Soldiers are mutinying, people are starving, and workers are striking, but worst of all, the war's lost. Across the country, soldiers once loyal to the Kaiser are now joining forces with the workers in an insurgency not only to overthrow Wilhelm, but to tear down the monarchist system. Cities all over Germany fall to the revolution, and finally, so too does Berlin. With mounting pressure, the Imperial Chancellor takes it upon himself to state that Kaiser Wilhelm II has abdicated. Revolutionary councils inspired by the revolution in Russia begin to form Soviet states in Bavaria and Bremen, but unlike Russia, it will never amount to anything. This is because leading the revolution are the two factions of the Social Democratic Party, or SPD. The first is the MSPD, Majority Social Democrats, who are composed of members who are more interested in a democratic system, wishing to convene a constituent National Assembly. Then there's the USPD, the Independent Social Democrats, who are composed of mostly the radical left, who wish to implement a council republic much like Soviet Russia. These two don't exactly see eye to eye, and now that their common enemy, the Kaiser, is gone, all that's left is to take control of the revolution. Shortly after the abdication, the Imperial Chancellor also resigns, but before stepping down, he hands the Chancellery over to Friedrich Ebert, the leader of the MSPD. This is a smart move. Germany's elites would rather deal with the moderate reformists than radical leftists, and have done so by giving them unofficial authority. From a window in the Reichstag, Ebert's colleague, Philipp Scheidemann, declares the birth of the new German Republic. But there's a problem. Just 2 hours later, Karl Liebknecht of the Spartacist League, a revolutionary branch tied to the USPD, proclaimed the Free Socialist Republic of Germany, stating that Philipp's proclamation was counter-revolutionary. Both Karl and Rosa believe that this new republic is just a half measure that keeps the old monarchist system alive, firmly advocating that a violent overthrow, like in Russia, is the only way to bring any real change. The next day, Ebert secured the support of the German military leadership, which the USPD was firmly against, and degraded the relationship between the two factions even further. So much so that by the 28th of December, the USPD withdrew from the Council of Representatives, deciding to side with the KPD, the German Communist Party, and the Spartacists, setting the stage for a revolt. Spartacus. You've probably heard that name before, and for good reason. He was a gladiator who led a slave rebellion against the Roman Republic, inflicting several defeats on its forces. That is who the party is named after, and they intend to do just that, wage a war in the name of revolution. And tonight, the perfect opportunity may have just arrived. It's Sunday, January 5th, 1919. In just 2 weeks from now, the SPD plans to hold a national election. One, they hope, will legitimize control over the revolution, but if everything goes to plan, that election could be postponed. Indefinitely. Just the day before, Ebert sacked the chief of police in Berlin, a USPD member by the name of Emil Eichhorn. He was accused of giving radical revolutionaries powerful positions in his security force. However, he was extremely popular with the workers in Berlin, and his dismissal sparked outrage. In response, Karl Liebknecht called for a general strike on January 5th, and the turnout was overwhelming. Over 500,000 workers went on strike in Berlin, and over 100,000 flooded the streets in protest against his dismissal. And later that night, things escalate even further. Armed revolutionaries seize control over several newspaper offices, including the SPD's own Vorwärts headquarters. Meanwhile, a revolutionary committee of 33 members, including both Liebknecht and Luxemburg, was formed to discuss on how to proceed. Liebknecht was ecstatic. He insisted the time for the workers' revolution had come and argued for the next day's protest to overthrow the government. Whereas Luxemburg wasn't too sure, something was off, and she's not wrong. Her concern were the soldiers stationed in the city. They weren't joining in. Either staying neutral if not loyal to the SPD, and without military support the uprising would be doomed. But it was put to a vote. This is a communist revolution after all. Liebknecht's case won out, with only 6 votes against him. Tomorrow, Spartacist Week as it would come to be known, would truly begin. The mass demonstration on Monday was even larger than Sunday. From 9 AM in the morning, protesters stood shoulder to shoulder. It was a particularly foggy morning, but when it lifted, they had not moved. The Revolutionary Committee called for the overthrow of the government and small skirmishes broke out, but generally the soldiers were unwilling to shoot their fellow countrymen and remained neutral. Ebert noticed this and realised his forces in Berlin were not enough to put down this uprising, not to mention those more heavily armed revolutionaries waiting in Vorwärts headquarters. On the 9th of January 1919, Ebert gave the order to crush the protesters, knowing that he had a trick up his sleeve. Instead of the police and soldiers in Berlin, he arranged to have Freikorps units, paramilitary groups made up of war veterans mixed in with young volunteers which all had 3 things in common. They resented Germany's defeat in the Great War, blamed it on Jews stabbing them in the back, and were staunchly anti-communist. The perfect concoction to put down this uprising. The protesters dispersed once being fired upon, but the armed revolutionaries in the buildings stood firm. The fighting lasted 3 days, and was a complete annihilation by the soldiers. Less of a battle and more of a massacre. Machine guns, mortars, flamethrowers were all used against the revolutionaries. They realised they stood no chance. Many even attempted to surrender, but were often shot anyway. The death toll reached a total of at least 150 on the Spartacist side, while the Freikorps merely suffered 17. Karl and Rosa immediately went into hiding, but made the fateful mistake to stay in Berlin. Like having 5 stars in GTA, the hunt was on. The government began a clean-up operation where they would disarm the population by confiscating unauthorized weapons. It didn't take long for them to be found. A civil defense militia found them in an apartment and were taken back to the headquarters where Captain Waldemar Pabst decided what to do with them. The thing is, he had already made his mind up. Pabst was a notoriously anti-Bolshevik officer, and it was already decided that they were to be killed. After being beaten so brutally that it wasn't even clear whether they were still alive before being taken to their next destination, they were both shot in the head. Karl was shot in the head 3 times at a nearby park and later turned in as an unknown corpse. Rosa would be shot, then dumped into the canal that runs through Berlin. It was never proven that Pabst gave the order to kill them, but later claimed it was the Minister of Defense, Gustav Noske, who made it clear that it would be convenient if they died. When the death of the 2 leading communist figures became known, there was once again outrage. The KPD would call for yet another general strike, but it would never reach the scale of Spartacist Week. The government showed no regret in the murders, claiming it was justified because so many more innocent people remained alive. No trial was ever pursued against Pabst, with only 2 soldiers, Otto Runge and Lieutenant Vogel, receiving light sentences. Attempted manslaughter and failing to report a corpse. But even then, Vogel was given passage into Switzerland after 3 days. On January 19th, the election would go ahead, where the SPD won 36.4% of the vote, a significant advantage over the USPD's 7.6%. The Weimar Republic staggered on, with a fractured far left-wing opposition that never fully recovered. The same could not be said for the far right. In 1933, the Nazis took power of Germany and publicly burned all of Rosa's writings in an attempt to erase her from history. After the war, Waldemar Pabst admitted in an interview that it was officers acting on his orders that carried out the killings, even identifying the man who killed Rosa. He fled to Finland after the assassination, but returned to Germany in 1935. Today, her and Karl's deaths are mourned by socialist groups all around the world who argue that Rosa could have changed history. To say that the uprising could have succeeded is honestly a stretch. A much more realistic scenario would be for Karl and Rosa to flee Berlin and live to fight another day, which poses some interesting questions. If they had survived, could have they unified the left enough to prevent the Nazis getting into power? Would Rosa, who openly criticized the Bolsheviks, have changed the direction of socialism in Europe? Or would have they ended up fleeing to Russia only to get purged by Stalin like so many other revolutionaries? In this segment, we're going to explore these scenarios and attempt to determine the course of events of what could have been if they had survived. Also, this is all speculation and none of this should be taken as fact. In 1917 Russia, Kerensky had used the Bolsheviks to crush Kornilov's coup attempt. In doing so, it paved the way for the Bolsheviks to take power. Now, in 1920 Germany, we have a similar situation. The Kapp Putsch threatens to coup the government, and if Karl and Rosa were still alive, they may have just unified the left enough to attempt what Lenin had done, use the government to legally eradicate most of their right-wing opposition. The only issue is that Ebert was less willing to work with the left than Kerensky. Ebert cut deals with the military and elites, then unleashed the Free Corps on the Spartacists. There's no way he'd work with the left to put down the Kapp Putsch. You know, it's kind of ironic. Both Kerensky and Ebert used radical paramilitaries to eradicate an opposition, only to have their countries lost to those same groups that they had used. If Germany's turn to the right was inevitable, then Rosa would be forced to flee and seek haven in other countries, potentially Soviet Russia, as it was where communism was succeeding, while she was still respected by the Bolsheviks despite her criticisms. However, her opposition to one-party rule would see her most likely purged by Stalin in the 1930s, meeting yet another gruesome end. Other than Russia, she could have fled back to Switzerland to continue her work, perhaps influencing Western European countries with strong socialist movements such as France and the Netherlands. But this is going too far into speculation, and I can't even begin to guess what could have happened in this case. But the real question is, could have Rosa and Karl surviving in 1919 prevented the Nazi regime from coming into power in 1933? During the economic chaos that encapsulated the Weimar Republic, the Nazis were able to offer solutions unopposed by any real opposition. However, a unified left could have provided alternate solutions for the German people and perhaps received some of the votes that the NSDAP gained in our timeline. In the 1932 German elections, Ernst Thälmann received 17% of the vote, as compared to the NSDAP's 33%. With a coalition of left-wing parties, that 17% could have grown and even stolen some votes from the NSDAP. In the following elections, the NSDAP were never able to achieve a majority, hence they were never elected into power. A stronger left would reinforce this struggle for them, receiving a definite lower share of the vote and perhaps allowing the SPD to continue running the country, hence prevent Germany's turn to radicalism at all. However, the communists getting into power in Germany is extremely unlikely, and that is a situation that would not happen. But that's all from me. Let me know what you guys think could have happened in the comments. This is a very broad topic, and there's a lot of different situations that could have occurred had she remained alive. But also, there's a possibility that nothing would have changed at all, and World War II would have continued the way it did. I personally think not much would have changed. She would have fled Germany and continued her writings from Switzerland, which was a common safe haven, and she had lived in there before and had been writing from Switzerland before, so I think she would have just gone back to that. Who knows? I don't. But I'm interested to know what you think. If you have some interesting ideas, leave them in the comments below. But like the video if you thought it was interesting, and I'll see you guys in the next one.